This is the story of a queen who had it all and lost it all. From glittering ballrooms to a bloody guillotine, in this video I will take you through the scandalous life and shocking death of Marie Antoinette. Our story begins on a chilly November day in 1755 in a fancy palace called the Hofburg in Vienna, Austria. That's where little Maria Antonia Josefa Johanna was born. But let's just call her Marie Antoinette. It's easier to say, and that's the name that would go down in history. Marie wasn't just any ordinary baby, she was an archduchess, which is a fancy way of saying she was a super important princess. Her dad was Francis I, the Holy Roman Emperor, which sounds impressive but didn't mean much by then, and her mom was Maria Theresa, who was the real boss of the Austrian Empire. Little Marie was the 15th child in her family. Can you imagine having 14 brothers and sisters? That's enough for 2 whole soccer teams. Growing up in the palace, Marie had a pretty sweet life. She had nice clothes, yummy food, and lots of people to take care of her. But it wasn't all fun and games. You see, Marie's mom, Empress Maria Theresa, was a tough cookie. She wanted all her kids to be smart and well-behaved, ready to rule countries and make good marriages. Marie was great at some things. She loved music and dancing, and she could charm the socks off anyone she met. Her teachers would complain that Marie was always daydreaming or giggling with her friends instead of studying. Her mom would get so frustrated. She'd write long letters telling Marie to stop being so silly and start acting like a proper princess, but Marie just couldn't help it. She loved having fun too much. As Marie grew up, she turned into a real beauty. She had big blue eyes, silky blonde hair, and perfect pale skin, which was super fashionable back then. People said she looked just like a pretty doll. But being pretty wasn't enough. Marie's mom had big plans for her. In the 1760s, Europe was like a giant chessboard, with all the royal families trying to make smart moves and grab more power. Empress Maria Theresa thought, what if she could get one of her daughters to marry the future king of France? That would be a super smart move, and guess who she picked for this important job? Yep, our girl Marie. So, when Marie was just 14 years old, I know, super young, right? She found out she was going to marry Louis Auguste, the grandson of the King of France. Louis was 15 and next in line to be king. Marie had never even met the guy, but that's how things worked back then for royal people. In 1770, Marie had to say goodbye to everything she knew. She left Austria in a fancy carriage, waving goodbye to her family as she set off on the long journey to France. Can you imagine how scared and excited she must have been? She was leaving behind her home, her language, even her adorable pet pug. Yes, she had a pug. She was ahead of her time. Finally, on May 16, 1770, Marie Antoinette married Louis Auguste in a super fancy ceremony at the Palace of Versailles. The place was decked out with flowers and gold everywhere. Marie wore a dress that was so heavy with jewels and fancy embroidery that she could barely walk. In 1774, something big happened. The old King of France, Louis XV, died. That meant Louis Auguste became the new king, Louis XVI, and Marie, at just 18 years old, she became the Queen of France. At first, people loved Marie Antoinette. She was young, beautiful, and brought a breath of fresh air to the stuffy old French court. But as time went on, things started to change. Marie discovered that being queen meant she could do pretty much whatever she wanted. Marie Antoinette quickly became known for her over-the-top fashion sense. She loved clothes and would spend hours trying on new outfits. Her dresses were covered in jewels and lace and cost more than most people earned in a year, but the craziest thing was her hair. Marie made super tall hairstyles popular. We're talking hair that was piled up 2 or 3 feet high. She'd have all sorts of things stuck in there. Feathers, jewels, even little model ships or bird cages. But clothes were just the start. Marie loved to party, and she threw the best bashes in all of France. At Versailles, the champagne would flow like water, and people would gamble huge amounts of money at card games. Marie herself loved to gamble, and she'd often stay up all night playing cards and betting. When she got bored of the main palace, Marie convinced her husband to give her a little place of her own. This was the Petit Trianon, a smaller palace on the grounds of Versailles. Marie spent tons of money fixing it up just the way she liked it. She even had a little fake farm built nearby where she and her friends would play at being shepherdesses and milkmaids. They'd wear fancy simple dresses that cost a fortune and pretend to do farm chores with perfectly clean animals. It was like a really expensive game of dress up. All this fun stuff cost a lot of money, and Marie was spending it like there was no tomorrow. She earned the nickname Madame Deficit because people blamed her for France's money problems. The country was already in debt from fighting wars, and Marie's spending didn't help. You see, while Marie was playing dress-up and throwing parties, regular people in France were having a really tough time. There had been some bad harvests, so food was expensive, taxes were super high, and many people couldn't afford to eat. They'd hear stories about the Queen's fancy parties and get angrier and angrier. Rumors started spreading about Marie Antoinette. People said she was sleeping around, that she didn't care about the French people, that she was secretly working for Austria, her home country, against France. None of this was true, but people believed it anyway. There's a famous story that when Marie heard people had no bread to eat, she said, "Let them eat cake." But guess what? She never actually said that. It was just another rumor that people spread because they were angry. But it wasn't just Marie's spending and the rumors that were causing problems. Her husband, King Louis XVI, wasn't a very strong ruler. He had trouble making decisions and couldn't figure out how to fix France's money problems. People were getting more and more frustrated with the whole royal family. Things came to a head in 1789. That summer, people in Paris got so angry that they attacked a prison called the Bastille. This was the start of the French Revolution. Suddenly, all the anger that had been building up for years exploded. In October, thousands of women marched from Paris to Versailles. They were hungry and angry, and they blamed the king and queen for their problems. The crowd forced the royal family to leave Versailles and move to a palace in Paris called the Tuileries. It was like they were prisoners in their own city. Finally, in June 1791, the royal family decided to try and escape. They snuck out of Paris in the middle of the night disguised as servants. They were trying to reach the border where loyal soldiers were waiting to protect them. But their plan didn't work. Someone recognized the king from his face on a coin, and the family was caught in a town called Varennes, just miles from safety. They were brought back to Paris in disgrace. Now, people didn't just dislike the king and queen, they saw them as traitors trying to abandon France. Things moved quickly after that. In August 1792, angry crowds attacked the Tuileries Palace. The royal family had to flee and ask the government for protection. But instead of helping them, the government abolished the monarchy altogether. No more kings and queens for France. Louis, Marie, and their children were locked up in a grim fortress called the Temple. They went from living in the fanciest palaces in Europe to being prisoners in a dark, cold tower. It must have been a huge shock for Marie, who was used to having everything she wanted. In December, Louis was put on trial for treason. Marie had to watch as her husband was found guilty and sentenced to death. On January 21st, 1793, Louis XVI was taken to the guillotine, a terrible machine with a sharp blade that chops off heads. Marie was now a widow, and France was officially a republic. For months, Marie was kept in the temple, separated from her children. Her fancy clothes were gone, replaced by simple, dark dresses. Her famous blonde hair turned white from stress, and she got very sick. But even in these terrible conditions, Marie showed a strength and dignity that surprised everyone. Finally, in August 1793, Marie was moved to an even worse prison called the Conciergerie. She was kept in a damp, smelly cell and guarded day and night. The revolutionary government decided it was time to get rid of her once and for all. On October 14th, Marie was put on trial. They accused her of all sorts of terrible things: treason, stealing money, even hurting her own son. The trial was super unfair. Marie wasn't allowed to have proper lawyers, and the verdict was pretty much decided before it even started. But Marie surprised everyone with how brave she was during the trial. When they accused her of hurting her son, she said, "I appeal to all mothers here. Is such a crime possible?" Her words touched many people, but it wasn't enough to save her. After just 2 days, Marie was found guilty of all charges and sentenced to death. She wrote a final letter to her sister-in-law, asking her to take care of her children. Then, early in the morning of October 16th, 1793, guards came to take Marie to the guillotine. So, what do we make of Marie Antoinette's story? Was she a villain who only cared about herself? Or was she a victim of circumstances beyond her control? The truth is probably somewhere in between. Marie Antoinette wasn't evil, but she was definitely out of touch with regular people. She grew up in a world of luxury and didn't understand what life was like for poor in France. Her spending and partying didn't help when the country was having money troubles. But Marie also got blamed for a lot of things that weren't her fault. She became a symbol of everything people hated about the old system of kings and queens. In the end, she paid a terrible price for mistakes that weren't all her own. What do you think about her? Was she a victim, or did she bring it all on herself? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe for more amazing content like this.